Going to post some OC. Happened when I was 15. Not really paranormal or anything, but pretty fucking creepy, at least to me. B15. Best friend is also 15. We love the outdoors / hiking / camping. Decide to go Innawoods and hike some trails / explore. Pack some food, water, hunting knife, pellet gun. We were 15, come on. Get to the woods. We decide to go off trail. Hiking off trail for about 30 minutes, maybe a little less. Terrain is pretty rough, obviously. Eventually we come across some weird shit. Ripped children's clothing. One children's shoe. Ripped women's panties. All of a sudden hear movement in the bushes behind us. Turn around. There stands a fucking man with a bicycle, just giving us this deathly stare that gave me chills to the bone. What really hit me first within the first 5 seconds was the fact that he was off trail with his bicycle. It didn't make sense to me. I mean, why? The fucking terrain is impossible for riding a bike. It's rocky, tons of logs and shit. Why would you go off trail for half an hour and drag your bike with you? So we're just staring at each other for about 30 seconds. My friend had a knife in his pocket. I reached inside my bag for the pellet pistol. We just fucking moved the fuck out of there as quick as we could. I honestly can't remember a time in my life where I'm more terrified. That guy was just wrong. Everything about him was just wrong. I think he didn't attack us honestly because my friend and I both looked like we were reaching for something, and I think he might have thought we were armed. A few years after that happened, I heard about people in national parks who go missing under real weird circumstances. Apparently that ex-cop Dave Paulides talks about it a lot. Now if I ever go into the woods, I make sure to take a Glock with me, and always take my friend as well since he has a German Shepherd. I also never go off the trails. Fuck that noise. Whenever you guys go in a woods, make sure you're fucking cautious.
Me, 16. Urban exploration with a QT pie friend. Find this really small, 2-story house, dilapidated as fuck. Doors are boarded up, windows are boarded up. See small window that leads into basement. We're both thin-framed enough to slide in. Basement must be bigger than first floor. Hobo caught in the corner, porn mags, canned food, and all. Should we leave, Anon? I don't want to get hobo knifed. Cot is covered in dust. Everything is covered in dust. No, I think we're good. Initiate flashlights. Basement is creepy, but otherwise empty and smells like rancid shit. Literal bucket of shit. Flies and mold and disgusting, I almost vomit. We go up the stairs into the house. Inside of house isn't dusty, but is dark. Explore all like 700 square feet. Living room / kitchen combo, bathroom, that's it. Bathroom is locked really tightly. Whatever. Living room looks really nice for an abandoned house. Kinda creepy, to be honest, feel like someone's watching us. Go upstairs. Anon, can we go? I want to see the rest of the place, then we can leave. Promise. Upstairs is 2 bedrooms and a bathroom. Weird, rotten kinda smell. Open first bedroom door, completely empty. Open second bedroom, also empty but has big stains on carpet and ripped up wallpaper. We open bathroom door together. Olfactory sensory overload. Dead, skinned squirrels and cats all over counter. Small skinned dog in toilet. Dried blood all over floor. Bundle of cloth in bathtub. Morbid curiosity is taking over. 4 red spots in cloth about 2 inches wide each. Hand shaking as I reach for the end of the cloth. Anon, please, can we go? Move the cloth. Dead blonde girl with smeared makeup, eyes wide open, mouth is gagged. Friend screams, I scream. We run down the hall, notice bedroom door is closed. I didn't close any of these doors. Run down the stairs, friend is still screaming. Previously locked bathroom door is open, see knives and such in there, and a chair facing the door. Another bolt of cloth in that tub. Bathroom door slams shut. Friend screams louder, heads straight for the basement to leave. I hear her leave. Can't move, too scared. House is completely silent. Hear door upstairs creaking. Fear paralysis gone. Run to the basement. Climb out tiny window. Friend is there, crying and shaking. We're just outside the window. Suddenly hear bam bam bam. I jump, she jumps, and screams. Tiny window is suddenly boarded up. Nope.jpg. We run back to her car in the driveway. There's a folded up note under the wiper. I grab it on my way to the passenger seat. We start driving home. I open note. We've seen your faces. Call the police and we come for you. I scream. She sees note. Breaks down crying. Never told anyone before. Not making this up. Stay the fuck out of San Antonio. Seriously.
When I and my wife were quite a bit younger, we decided that we would spend the bicentennial outdoors. Yes, July of '76 we're old. We lived in Pueblo at the time, and decided to go hiking, fishing and camp along Lime Creek between Durango and Silverton. There wasn't anything other than brookies in the creek, but they were plentiful and fun to catch. We left our car by the side of the road along Old Lime Creek Road about 5 miles in from the highway and packed in upstream along the creek with our shepherd, Rebel. It only took us about an hour to get to where we wanted to camp, a nice meadow beside the creek just before a slot canyon that required you to swim to get any further upstream. Either that or take a several-mile detour. We camped uneventfully that night, the 3rd of July, enjoying the sounds of the rippling creek and nature all around us. It was such a nice night that we just slept out under the stars, didn't bother to pitch our little backpacking tent. A little cool, but we had the fire going and our lightweight 30-degree bags, so we were very comfortable. The next day we had breakfast, packed up and we all swam our way up the creek to the next wide spot with a bit of bank in the canyon, only about 150 yards or so. Now Rebel was never one to turn down a chance to get wet, but we had to do quite a bit of coaxing to get him to follow us up the creek. We fished and splashed upstream a bit, and before we knew it, it was lunchtime. We thought we'd fry up some of those brookies, but we were in the slot canyon that terminated in a fairly deep pool with about a 10-foot rocky waterfall at the end of it. We decided that I would scale the waterfall and pull the dog and the packs up, and then I'd help Maggie get up. It was fairly difficult, even with the help of an old cable left over from a mining operation that was hanging down the side wall of the canyon. It took a lot of effort, and though we finally made it, we looked back down that waterfall and wondered what the heck we were thinking. Rebel was none too happy about it either, and seemed to get more irritable by the minute. We found enough driftwood at the rocky top of the falls to get a fire started and get the fish fried up, but that was about it. You know the uneasy feeling that several others have mentioned? It was like a switch turned on and we all of a sudden became aware of our surroundings. It grew like a cancer, and I actually watched the hair on the back of Rebel's neck stand up. Maggie felt it too, and we both noticed that it was getting dark fast down in this canyon. First thought in my head was a cat, and I actually felt a bit better about that because I figured the cat would leave us be, between the fire and the dog. I told Maggie what I thought and she seemed to feel a bit better, too. I did not want to get caught in the dark in the canyon, for a bunch of reasons, flash floods etc. I spied what looked like a mine shaft about 200 feet above us, a heck of a steep climb, but it looked like our best bet. We pulled out our flashlights, and by the time we reached it, it was pitch black. The dog was a mess by this point, whipping around in circles, whining, yelping and generally being a real pain in the ass. Maggie and I were drenched with sweat and immediately began to freeze. July in the mountains is a weird thing. I have seen blizzard conditions before, but this was like someone turned on the deep freeze. We were at what looked like the start of a mine. It only went back about 10 feet, but there was evidence of fires at the mouth, and they curiously looked fresh. I was too tired to think more about it. I knew we had to get out of our wet clothes, pitch the tent, and climb in our bags before we got serious hypothermia. That was no fun, let me tell you, having to do all of that by the light of our rapidly dying flashlight. And there was no firewood anywhere close. I cursed myself several times for letting things get this far out of control. We finally got the tent pitched right there in the back of this little cave, buck naked as we had no dry clothes left. The sleeping bags were slightly damp too, even though we had stuffed them in plastic garbage bags before our swimming expedition up the canyon. We froze. It was miserable. About 1 in the morning I called Rebel into the tent for a little heat. The dogs seemed to have calmed down greatly, and with the added heat we drifted off. Sometime during the night I heard something that just about woke me. I was still in a haze, so I fell asleep again immediately. I woke up one other time, because I thought I heard Rebel yip a little bit, but again I was in and out. I put my hand out to pet his head and he licked my hand. I fell asleep again. Maggie later said she fell asleep the same time as I did but never woke up at all during the night. I woke to the most horrible noise I have ever heard come out of a 100-pound woman. Just the most god-awful shrieks that I have ever heard. I never want to hear that again. I opened my eyes just in time to see a man at the mouth of the shaft, silhouetted against the morning daylight, looking back at us with the most twisted evil grin I have ever seen on the face of another human. I scrambled to get free of my tightly zipped bag and the little tent while he just crouched there and grinned. When I was just about free, he disappeared. Now, we were granola crunchin' tree huggin' anti-gun nature freaks at the time, so the only thing I had of any consequence as a weapon was my camp knife. I found it after what seemed like hours of searching, but really was probably under a minute. I very cautiously made my way to the entrance, millimeters at a time. The guy was gone. About that time Maggie started screaming and whimpering again, so I rushed back to the back of the shaft. She had struggled out of the tent and was pointing at what used to be Rebel. His head was nearly severed, and the tent and the bags were ruined with the blood all over everything. She had blood all over her, so the first thing I did was make sure she was not injured. Then I checked myself. We were okay, it was all Rebel's blood. We put on our still damp cold clothes from the night before and then we noticed that our boots were gone. We were in trouble. I had some paracord, so we tied some shirts and towels around our feet and climbed back down towards the creek. We left everything in the mine, except for the knife and some stuff that we shoved in our pockets. It took us 8 hours to get back down to the car, and we were like hamburger. Hands, feet, arms, and legs scraped raw, bruised and bleeding. We jumped in, the car started right up thankfully, and we left a dust cloud that blanketed the valley as we sped down the rough trail toward Durango. We limped into the sheriff's office and we looked like hell. We got our story out, my wife through tears and me talking way too fast. But finally got it all out. The deputy said that they would go out first thing in the morning and asked us to stay in town. We had no money for a hotel, so he let us stay in a cell after we showered and changed into prison jumpsuits. We were there at the jail waiting when the expedition returned with the convoy of 3 trucks. I noticed that all the officers, who were quite wet and filthy, gave us dirty looks as they passed us, and the deputy that we had talked to the day before herded us back to his office. Then came the interrogation. Turns out that some animal had spread the dog's remains all down the slide to the creek, and he said that there was nothing else there. No tent, no backpacks, nothing. He asked us if we had any drugs. I did not want to admit to him that we had some herb, so I denied it. It was clear that we were fighting a losing battle. They had come to the conclusion that we were wandering out in the woods high on LSD while a mountain lion had gotten our dog. The bastard even made us change back into our filthy clothes and give back the jumpsuits right then. He told us that he had better never see us again. We left. Maggie was sobbing. I never have been back to Durango. The thing that I still have nightmares about years later, and I have never mentioned this to Maggie, is the second time I woke up when I heard Rebel yelp. Was that when his throat was cut? And if it was, was it the dog who licked my hand before I fell back asleep? I still go out in the wilderness, never overnight, out well before dark, only with other people, and always with a big gun. I respect animals, but I fear people. Read a thread at the start of the year about some weird experiences I had as a Boy Scout. I'll just post what I had in there. I have lived my entire life in Oklahoma, and it's probably just about as rural as most of you think it is. Outside of the Oklahoma City/Moore/Norman area and Tulsa, Oklahoma is mostly small towns, casinos, and lots, of woods and open plains. Backcountry galore, a perfect place to teach young scouts the basics without throwing them right into the heart of the fray. It's usually pretty quiet everywhere you go and people are generally friendly. We're the definition of flyover state. If there's one thing people probably immediately relate to Oklahoma, it's Indian/native land/reservation/folklore/etc. While this stuff isn't prevalent in the bigger cities, it becomes incredibly prominent as you enter the more rural parts of the state. For those curious, I'm not sure how much land is still legally considered native, but it's probably more than any other state. This particular incident occurred the summer of 2011 at a scout camp not too far from the Oklahoma/Texas border. This was the last trip I ever made out there, and I don't really regret it. Camp lasts Sunday through Saturday, 1 week. Arrive on Sunday, work on merit badges Monday Thursday, chill Friday, leave Saturday. The leaders of my troop were comprised almost entirely of one family, whom I'll call the Perkins. There was the great-grandfather, C, the grandfather, D, and the grandson, Buck. C was about 75 when I joined, and fit the crotchety old man stereotype like a glove. He was abrasive, impatient, and quick to lose his temper while at the same time happy to help any boy that didn't ask stupid questions. C was also a war veteran, not sure which war though. D was a lot like his father, except, I dunno. Cryptic. I guess what I'm trying to say is that you could tell D had seen some shit. He was a little out there, very my way or the highway, do what I say if you don't wanna die kind of guy. Probably 60-ish, but built like a bear. The man was massive and intimidating, and he knew it. To this day I think D knows a hell of a lot more about this particular incident than he'll ever tell, but I never had the courage to ask him about anything. Buck, the grandson, was about a year older than me. Buck was a bit thick in the head, but he was tough and built just like his granddad. He was also as loyal as a golden retriever, and the word fear wasn't exactly in his rather limited vocabulary. But I digress. Another key player was my best friend at the time, Dylan. Dylan was stubborn, headstrong, and generally looking for trouble. He and I started scouts together at 6, and were the only two that had stuck together since that time. We were usually inseparable, which probably saved our lives that night. Now, I was about the opposite of Dylan. I was meek, easily scared, and suffered from constitutional delay, which means that I looked like I was 10 even though I was 15. Pick related. I'm the scrawny kid in the blue. This was taken earlier in 2011, around April. So anyway, we had been going to the scout camp for as long as I had been involved with the troop. Every summer, usually in June or July, we'd make our week trip down there and head home. Dylan and I knew what the camp was supposed to feel like and sound like, as did C and D, who had been going there for 20-odd years or so. This year, we immediately knew something was off. Have you ever walked into a place and just felt, like, bad vibes? Like, bad energy just kind of taking up residence somewhere? It was kind of like that the moment we drove through the gates. The younger boy seemed pretty oblivious, but I know Dylan felt like I did. And D. Man, I don't think I've ever seen D as tense as he was that whole week. He was normally pretty chillax if a little strict, but he was on edge the moment we arrived on the grounds until we left on Saturday. I suppose the best way to do this from here on is to give a chronological account of events that happened day to day over the week. That's the only way I can think to do this without losing myself and you guys. The first thing you do when arriving at camp is drive to the registration office to confirm campsites, number of boys/leaders/ etc. We did this, but D was gone for a very long time. When he came back, he was being escorted by the camp ranger. As D was hopping back into the sedan, I remember hearing the ranger say something like, "Just let me know ASAP if anything happens." While this isn't an odd thing to say or hear, I now wonder if it held a deeper meaning. Our campsite was toward the northeast end of camp, down in a tiny valley surrounded by rock outcroppings on the north and south. The northern outcroppings were split from east to west, and created what we called the storm shelter, basically this little crevice we'd hide in if severe weather ever sprang up. I was assigned to check up on it, make sure it was clear of debris and shit before the week started. So I walk around to the shelter, and I am slammed with this awful smell. I knew it was something dead, and it smelled big. Once got down into the crevice, I saw that it wasn't something big, but a bunch of smaller animals in piles, birds, foxes, raccoons, parts of a deer. There was a ton of dead, mutilated bodies back there. I nearly puked, it smelled so bad. The heat didn't help either. Alarm bells weren't really ringing yet, but I was definitely weirded out. I told D about it, and he said he'd have a look and clean up and that I should just forget about it. Pig related, similar looking to the storm shelter. Monday. Our campsite was basically set up as one giant semicircle. Our tents formed a ring that almost enclosed pavilions in the center. Very little time was actually spent at our campsite, as we were all out working on merit badges, at the mess hall/canteen/shooting range/lake/etc. There was no reason for any boy to be in camp, and it was rare to find one who wanted to stay in camp. Dylan and I stuck together most evenings, and Monday night we decided to shoot, or rather, Dylan decided to shoot. I was terrible shot, and didn't want to pay for ammo I'd end up wasting. We were about halfway to the range when he realized he'd forgotten his money, so we turned around and headed back towards camp. When we got there, it was empty as expected, but we noticed one of the tent flaps had been left open. Big problem there. D was constantly on us to keep our flaps shut, so as to keep any curious woodland animals/insects out of our tents. So I walked over there to zip it up when I realized that it was still zipped, and that the door had simply been ripped open. The tent had been ransacked. Sleeping bags were shredded, trunks flipped over and the supplies gone through. It was an utter wreck. I called Dylan over, and our conversation went something like, "Shit man. Holy hell. Who would do this? I dunno man. It wasn't one of our boys. D would make sure he'd never see the light of day again. Should we tell him? Do you wanna have your head bit off? Let's let him find it for himself." That was a stupid decision in hindsight. We should have found D and alerted him immediately. But since we didn't want to suffer his wrath, we didn't. When we got back to camp that night, everyone was on edge. All the younger boys were freaking out, whispering about Bigfoot, etc. D told us that the rest of the week, we all had to be back in camp before sundown. Which I thought was kind of pointless. The tent had been ransacked during the day, but whatever. Pig related, similar to campsite. Tuesday. Tuesday was actually pretty uneventful. All I recall is that some boys a couple campsites over from ours got spooked because they heard noises in and around their campsite that night. If I'm being honest, that could have been anything. There's an awful lot of animal life out in rural Oklahoma, and it's not unusual for new/amateur scouts to accidentally lure raccoons/foxes/occasionally bigger things into camp by leaving food out at night. But I still have to wonder if it was related to my other experiences that week. Wednesday. Wednesday was different. The bad vibes seemed to be getting stronger. Or maybe that was just me getting more wound up. I don't know. What I do know is that the mess hall had been broken into the night before, and utterly wrecked. Food had been half eaten, supplies were strewn everywhere. At least, that's what I heard. We weren't allowed up the mess hall until dinner that night, by which time the camp had cleaned everything up. Of course, everyone was on edge now. There were mutterings and whisperings, rumors circulating that basically would have been an/x/wet dream. Did you hear? They found some homeless guy camping out on the other side of the lake. Tom found some really weird footprints outside his tent last night. Did you see them? I heard some weird mating call last night. Did anyone else? Could have sworn I was being stalked while walking back to camp last night. Anyone else feel the same way? Out of all of these rumors, there was one that stuck out to me after the week was over, and the only reason it did is because it reminded me of my experience on Sunday. I found a dead raccoon outside my tent last night. It was, like, mutilated and shit. Which one of you fuckers thought that would be funny? I guess outside of the mess hall business, Wednesday was pretty uneventful too, just really tense. Thursday. Holy shit, man. Thursday night, the camp would always sort of hold this party thing out by the main gate to sort of celebrate the hard work everyone had put in over the week. There would a bonfire, a chuck wagon, basically the canteen on wheels, stories and songs, lots of Boy Scout stuff, you know? Anyways, D was super against letting anyone in the troop go. He wanted to keep every boy in camp that night. But after listening to 12 and 13-year-olds whine and cry for 30 minutes, he kind of begrudgingly changed his mind and allowed them to go as long as they were escorted by the older boys. So Buck, Dylan, and I were pretty much responsible for corralling 15 middle schoolers. D said he had a meeting to go to, which I knew was a lie. Scoutmaster meetings were always held in the mornings, never at night. But what the hell? So the three of us start walking them down there, when I realize that we've left the flashlights back at camp and we only have about 5 minutes of light left. I tell Dylan and Buck to go on ahead of me, but both insist on coming. In the end, Buck escorted the kids to the bonfire while Dylan and I went back to camp. That was a mistake for multiple reasons. We had only been gone about 10 minutes, which means it was almost dark once we got back, but our camp was totaled. Our pavilions had been torn down, tents and their contents were strewn about everywhere, food was out and scattered, it was a complete mess. Alarm bells were basically screaming code red GTFO right now, but Dylan was already into the camp before I could stop him. That's when the smell hit us. That smell of dead, decaying stuff, but this time it was mixed with something else. Kind of like spoiled milk. I'm not entirely sure how to describe it. Not the burnt copper/blood scent/X/says is related to Goatman, I know what that smells like. This was something else. Dylan and I both agreed that we needed to find D ASAP. Fate was on our side that night, because not a second later he rushed into camp in full commando mode. I'm talking giant knife on his hip, brandishing a pistol. Sorry, I don't know anything about guns, and the biggest fish light I've ever seen. Dylan and I immediately start blubbering to D about what was going on, begging for answers and almost crying. He told us both to shut up, and the arsest, but quietest voice I've ever heard. That's when I noticed his face for the first time. He had a gash down the right side of his forehead that was bleeding pretty profusely, and a massive bruise beginning to envelop the left side of his face. It looked like he had picked a fight with a titanium beam and lost. Let me just remind you that D is about 6 feet 7 inches and around 260 pounds of pure muscle. Whatever bested him was fucking strong. D beckoned us over to him and the conversation was something like, "Where the hell are the kids?" "The bonfire, sir." "What the fuck are you two doing back here?" "We forgot the flashlights, sir." All right. Here's what's gonna happen. Dylan, I'm gonna give you this knife, okay? Anon, you go get those flashlights you were talking about and point them towards the storm shelter. I'm going over there. If anything but me comes out, you two run like hell, do you understand? We nodded, and off he went. He rounded the corner into the shelter, and that's about when we heard the noise. Have you ever heard someone trying to talk while choking on their own blood or something like that? That sort of gurgling, gasping noise? That's what it sounded like, mixed with a sort of low growling. Dylan and I stood there frozen for what felt like hours, but was probably more like 5 minutes when that noise abruptly ceased and Dee returned pale as sheet but in one piece. So Dee escorted us there, and refused to answer any of our questions or give us any sort of closure as to what had just happened. All he said was, "I don't think we'll have to worry about anything for the rest of the week." So we went to the bonfire, but Dylan and I kept to ourselves and tried to figure out what the hell was going on. When we got back to camp, we did our best to repair as much as we could in the dark. Dylan and I didn't sleep at all that night, we were wide awake. At what must have been about midnight, I heard a few noises outside and saw a flashlight beam waving around before finally coming to still motion, pointed towards the storm shelter. I poked my head out of my tent, and observed Dee sitting a chair, flashlight pointed at the storm shelter, watching and waiting. I watched Dee all night, and Friday I finally got some answers. By Friday, I mean about 6:30 that morning. Around then C came out of his tent and proceeded to have a not exactly quiet conversation with Dee. Now bear with me, as I'm reconstructing this from memory, so some bits might not be entirely accurate. Anything new? No. I've been out here all night. Nothing since I saw it earlier. I still think you're wrong. They never come this far south, especially this time of year. Must have been something else. I know what I saw, Dad. I'm telling you, they're getting bolder. Or more desperate. Well, I'm heading to the mess hall. Need my coffee? Want anything? And they proceeded to talk about breakfast for a while and C eventually left. I figured if I wanted any sort of closure as to last night, now was my only chance to talk to Dee alone. So I approached Dee, but before I could say anything he turns around and gave me a look that could have curdled new milk. I stopped in my tracks, and he says, "Come. Sit." So I sat next to him, and this all I got out of him. "You were pretty brave last night, kid. Incredibly stupid, but brave. What did you see?" "Nothing, sir." He was quiet for a good 5 minutes, and I finally mustered up the courage to ask him what the hell was going on. "Sir." "Yes." "Pardon me, sir, but what was it? What's going on? How old are you, Anon?" 15, sir." "Anon, the world is a far darker place than you realize right now. You're too young. Let me give a piece of advice that you need to keep in your head during times just like this. Don't ask questions you don't want to know the answer to. Or that you already know the answer to. Do I know the answer to this question, sir? Do you? It wasn't natural, was it, sir? Depends on your definition of natural, Anon. To me, the thing that's terrorized us all week is as natural as any other creature in these woods and on this earth. Simply a darker side of nature, one that usually stays away from heavily trafficked areas like this. They don't like people in large groups. Then what's it doing here, sir? Honestly, Anon, I don't know. I think it got confused. Lost, even. Is it gone, sir? For now, yes. I don't think it will come back while we're here." Dylan woke up about then, as did the rest of the camp, so our conversation was cut short. The rest of Friday was pretty uneventful. Dylan, Buck, and I palled around camp for a while, talking about what we thought it was. Or rather, Buck and I did. Dylan didn't really talk about it, and acted increasingly imitated as the day went on. Friday night, all was well. I slept heavily. Had bad dreams, but I slept. Saturday. We were up about 6:30 that morning to tear down camp. I was ready to go, and even though D was reassuring Friday morning, I could tell he was eager to leave too. He was tense, and would often stop to look towards the storm shelter. About 11:30, D asked me to check the shelter area and clean it up with him, even though no one had actually used it at all that week. We got back there, and it was completely different than what I'd seen Sunday. It'd been cleaned, spotlessly so. And something similar to pick-related had been marked on each side of the canyon walls. I assume it's native, but I don't know what it means and have never particularly cared to find out. We left about noon, and I've never gone back. So that's my big story, the one I can't really explain. I know D knew way more than he was letting on. I think Buck knew more than I did too, but he clammed up whenever I tried to talk to him about it. So, what do you think? What was it? I think it was Native American, to say the least. But don't know what. I have a couple more if anyone is interested, and can answer questions too. I'll be here for a while yet. Speculative, I'm afraid. That's part of the reason I'm posting to /x/. Any /x/fills have any idea as to what this thing could have been?
I remember when the humans defeated the Kress Imperium. I'll remember it until I breathe my last. Do you remember it, my old friend? There was no answer from the bed next to me. I'm sure you do, you were there after all. The war had started when I was only 1 cycle old. I remember when our race first discovered yours. We had stumbled on a colony during a standard mapping expedition. Rather than try to make contact at that time, our Grand Imperator sent a full honor fleet and our prime delegate. To this day no one truly knows what went wrong or who fired first. What we do know for sure was that a lucky, or rather unlucky, shot had hit the prime delegate's flagship, killing him and the fleet commander instantly. It didn't help that the prime delegate was also the Imperator's firstborn. Shortly after that, the entire colony's defensive fleet was in ruins. In a fit of rage, the fleet sub-commander had the entire colony burned to ashes, and just like that, we were at war. How you humans managed to resist us so long was almost as maddening as how you won the war. Your ships were slow, their shields were weak, and their weapons were underpowered. The only thing you had going for you was your cunning and your ability to reproduce. No matter how many colonies we burned, no matter how many ships we destroyed, there seemed to be an endless amount of reinforcements for you to send in their place. Your capacity to build fleets was like nothing we had seen before. You also fought every battle with a stubborn determination that has never been matched by the over 100 races we have encountered in this galaxy. You would send 15 of your ships to destroy one of ours, and when that didn't work, you would send 50. But in the end, even that was not enough. After nearly a cycle of war, we finally saw a change. You were less likely to engage us in direct battles, preferring raids and hit-and-run tactics. When you did choose to fight us, your fleets were smaller and seemed to be less willing to commit to a full-out attack. The War Council had thought that you had finally reached the point where you were no longer capable of resisting. How wrong they were. I was a signals sub-officer, just out of primary training and barely 2 cycles, or roughly 40 of your Earth years old. I was working in the War Council's Tactical Center. They were discussing their next steps in the war and trying in vain to determine where your home world might be. Suddenly our long-range sensors picked up a group of ships jumping into real space just outside of our defensive grid. We knew they were human, but we didn't recognize the ship configuration. There were only 12 of them, and as they slowly made their way forward, we didn't even think to open fire. The ships were small and looked as if they had been cobbled together out of debris and wreckage. It almost seemed as if they were lost and wanted to surrender to us until they opened fire. Their weapons were pathetically weak, but they took us by surprise. Before our defensive weapons could return fire, they had done heavy damage to our main long-range sensors. Of course, they didn't get off a second shot. All but one of the ships were instantly vaporized. The last one tried to flee, but its engines overheated and melted the aft half of the ship. Instantly the Council ordered our learners to get to work. That was the one thing we picked up from you during the war. The limited number of victories you had given you the chance to study us and our technology. You took our weapons and attempted to reverse engineer them. The result was something between your weapons and ours, but it was certainly more effective. You also studied how we fought and adapted to us as much as you could. Our ways have always been rigid. You once said that we lacked imagination. But now we tried to use your own methods against you. We studied the wreckage of your fleet, but couldn't find much use. The ships actually were cobbled together out of mismatching parts, and there were no survivors to interrogate. At the end of our learner's report, just an addendum really, was that the sole surviving ship had 2 designations. Your ship names were rather much more colorful than ours, those that were intact enough for us to study at least. The one surviving ship was named the Folly, but right under it, stenciled on the buckled hull of the bow, was 1 to 12. We thought that it was simply the numerical designation of that ship in the group and ignored it. 2 rotations later you attacked again. This time the fleet was larger and the ships were better equipped. The fleet didn't hesitate to open fire and were much more prepared for our defenses. The battle still didn't last very long and our losses were minimal. Once again our learners were sent out. The few ships that were left mostly intact had a wide range of names, but every one of them had the designation 2 to 12 on their bow. Still the Council could not understand the meaning of this designation. Had we figured it out sooner, I really doubt it would have made a difference in the end. Another 2 cycles later, almost to the minute, another fleet attacked. This one actually had ships we were familiar with. They were older battle cruisers like the Formidable, the Valiant, and the Daring. This fleet was about half the size the fleets you had sent into battle back at the beginning of the war, but they had been outfitted with more advanced weapons and shields. Our defense fleet was small since we had thought that you didn't know where our homeworld was and that you were on the verge of losing the war. The battle was fierce, but as was common, we gained the upper hand. When it was clear that your fleet was going to lose, the surviving ships did something we had never seen before. Rather than fleeing or fighting to the death, the last ships intentionally rammed the nearest Kressian ship. When the battle was over, your entire fleet, some 70 ships, was gone. We had lost 3 warships and over a dozen were critically damaged. It was one of the costliest battles we had ever fought. As our repair crews were sent out to assess the damage, our learners noted on the recordings that every ship in the fleet that we could get a clear view on had the designation 3 to 12 on their bow. Finally the Council realized what that meant. They thought that surely the humans didn't have the ability to field 9 more fleets like the one they had just sent, but at their suggestion, the Imperator recalled a reserve fleet and sent out several attack groups to search our home sector for more humans. Like clockwork, you would send a fleet to attack us every 2 cycles. Each fleet was larger and stronger than the last, and the names became more hostile to match the growing ferocity of your attacks. We witnessed the destruction of ships like the Vengeance and the Retaliation, and as each fleet was down to its last ships, they would ram into ours or intentionally detonate their phased drives in order to cause as much damage as possible. Our losses were mounting and fear had begun to build not only among the rank and file, but also within the War Council itself. By the time the 8 to 12 fleet had attacked, we were recalling every active fleet within range to bolster our defenses. When Fleet 9 to 12 attacked, we were on the verge of panic. This fleet was massive, easily numbering over 1,000 ships. We saw ships that we had never encountered before. These were not the crude and bulky vessels we were accustomed to. These ships were sleek and fast. Their shields were powerful, and we were quite dismayed to see that they had the same pulse cannons that our own cruisers and battleships used. By then our entire fleet was clustered around our home world, so we still won the battle, but not before several of your ships broke through our lines and began to bombard our planet. The damage was relatively minor, but it set off a panic among the population. The people knew that we were fighting off attack after attack, but the War Council had always told them that we were suffering no losses while they were being utterly destroyed. Now everyone knew that the humans were not giving up on the war, but were willing to sacrifice much to destroy us. At that point the Council had, quietly, begun to discuss other options. As a race steeped in traditions and honor, it was almost incomprehensible to even consider surrendering to the humans, but the loss of civilian life and the fact that each fleet we faced was becoming more and more powerful was giving us cause to talk. We knew that there were at least 3 more fleets ready to attack us, and if they continued to grow in size and strength we might not be able to win. And we knew that losing would mean the death of countless Kressians. After all the death and destruction we had visited upon your people, we knew that our fate would be sealed if we could not end the war on terms. Right on time, 2 rotations later, Fleet 10 to 12 jumped into our system. There were only 4 ships, but they were big. No, big doesn't quite describe them. They were massive, bigger than massive. The best measurement we could get was over 5 krents, or nearly 3 of your kilometers long, almost 4 times the size of our largest war cruiser. Every open space of these ships was studded with large pulse cannons and missile tubes. They came screaming right into the heart of our fleet. For once we knew how you must have felt. We sent hundreds of our ships out to fight 4 of yours, and we were getting slaughtered. But this time it was our numbers that won out. The sacrifices of so many of our ships and commanders allowed us to destroy the war, famine, pestilence and death. As always, we didn't understand the significance of the names at the time. When it was over we had less than 1,000 ships remaining. The inner orbit of our planet was choked with wrecked hulls and frozen bodies. Pieces of ships were raining down into our atmosphere, where they would catch fire and slam into the ground. The Council had no choice. They told the Imperator that if we didn't surrender to the humans when the next fleet arrived, then it was likely that the last vestiges of our fleets would be destroyed, and that our homeworld would be sterilized of all life. Reluctantly he agreed. 2 rotations later Fleet 11 to 12 jumped into our system. We couldn't get a clear reading on them as they were outside our normal scanning range and our long-range scanner was still damaged. It was impossible to get a clear count, but we estimated that there were almost 10,000 ships. One of them was even bigger than the last 4. It must have been at least 6 kilometers long and had what looked to be cannons that were over 1/4 a kilometer in size. The fleet stayed just out of our visual range, but its presence was all we needed. Almost immediately I was ordered to send a message to your fleet. We requested that delegates be sent to discuss terms of surrender. I can't imagine the debate that went on amongst your people, but finally a small shuttle emerged from the fleet and headed towards the Imperator's palace. The War Council, in their shame, refused to meet with your delegates. Instead then nominated one of their members and sent me along as an honor guard. That was when I saw you, my first human. You were standing at end of your shuttle's ramp next to another delegate. You with your red folder and he with his green folder. Through the few human survivors that our fleet had managed to take, we managed to decipher your language and program a translator. Through that, the lone council member announced that he was here to discuss the terms of our surrender. You and your co-delegate traded a brief look. I didn't know what it was at the time, but I have come to learn it was relief. Your co-delegate stepped forward and offered your list of terms for our surrender. Your terms were quite reasonable really. There were demands that we turn over copies of all military and civilian technology as well as working prototypes so that you could adapt them. We also had to make territorial concessions as well as accept an occupying force in order to ensure that we did not rebuild in an attempt to fight again. When all the songs were sung and our honor pledges were finished, you opened a communicator and said one word, "Sunrise," and you and your partner turned to leave. A voice in the transmitter in my ear told me that your fleet was beginning its approach. Maybe it was because I was young and impulsive, or perhaps I knew that my dishonor was so complete that it couldn't get any worse. But either way I stepped out of line and called out to you. Wait, if your co-delegate had our terms for surrender, what was in your folder? Another look crossed your face, one that I would learn to be a wry smile. This folder here? You asked. This folder holds terms of surrender. I told you that I didn't understand and your smile faltered. You looked me right in the eyes and said, "These are the terms we were going to offer for our surrender to you." When your fleet arrived in orbit I finally understood. The ships were in bad shape. They were falling apart and looked just like the first fleet that had attacked us. They were hospital ships and cargo haulers, refitted transports that looked as if they were about to fall apart. The massive ship we saw was actually your first colony ship back, before you had even discovered the phased drive and faster than light travel. You had grafted phased drives to it and had to tow it into position using decrepit ore haulers. Our occupiers were disheveled civilians that looked half-starved. Over the next many rotations I learned the truth. You had gambled everything on this plan. Every last resource had been poured into the building of the grand fleets that you had used to attack us. Fields that you used to grow food were tilled over so you could build weapons factories. You had stripped half a dozen colonies and hundreds of asteroids and moons in order to assemble the vast fleets for your attack. You literally had nothing left to fight us. The fleet in orbit was there either to occupy us in the event of victory or to be used as an offering of slaves in the event of your defeat. You were so stretched thin of resources we had to supply you with fuel just so the bulk of your fleet could return home. You knew that attacking us directly might not have been a sure victory, so you had to make us believe that we couldn't face the endless onslaught of your fleets. Your final gamble had paid off. With peace secured, we were both able to rebuild your broken empire. Now we are the strongest of allies. We fight side by side against those that would dare to oppose us. I was only able to visit you now due to the fact that my fleet is running a joint training exercise with one of yours. That is why I am here now, and there is something I must ask you. I didn't realize at the time because there was so much to do, and I haven't been able to see you in the 4 cycles since the peace treaty was ratified. But now that I have you here, I must know. The last fleet we encountered during the final battles was designated 11 to 12. You must tell me, as I have never been able to figure it out. What was the 12th fleet? What was 12 of 12? With that, the frail old man in the hospital bed looked over to the Kress fleet commander standing before him. A wry smile stretched across his weathered and pale face. Perhaps, he whispered, that is best left to the imagination. And that's all, folks. What do you think?
I got a story, been meaning to post this one for a while. This is back around 2006, early summer. I was just your typical 17-year-old kid. Parents moved around a lot back in those days, but we always ended up living beside large forests, woods, or prairie places. Done plenty of exploring, with and without friends. Ton of stories, but there's always one which makes you look back on with no definite answer in sight, no matter which way you look at it. But this is how it went down. Played a lot of video, and watched a lot of TV. Taps was big in these days. People respected them then, so you can see I was really taken by the whole let's go ghost hunting trend. One of my picks. Near my house there's this big urban forest, kind of like New York Park, split into 3 parts. Forest 1, 2, 3. Through the years, I had a couple strange unexplained events happen to me in them. Phantom smells, lavender, roses, simply faded away as quick as they came. At night, in Forest 2, which had a concrete foundation where probably a house once stood, me and a few friends would see brief bright flashes of light just erupt over our heads with nothing ever there for miles, too close down for planes. It actually lit up the ground around us like if it were a hovering camera flash. Of course, now that I look back on it, it might have been a hunter's camera gadget strapped to a tree or something. One's guess. More pics. Then there was Forest 3, which had a cemetery in it. Caught a ton of EVPs there, chilling ones. Most notable one, I asked, is there a heaven, a hell, why don't you call for God? And a young woman replied to me in a sad tone. There is no God. So there was some freaky stuff going on there. One day I woke up early in the morning, 4:30 a.m. between 5. I recently bought this cheap $70 digital camera from Walmart and was extremely bored with it. So I figured an early walk in the forest should provide me with some unique pictures, which they did if you want to see them. Probably not. But they're all from this day. And we'll post some. So I set out doing the same thing I've done probably 100 tons by now. I'm jaywalking down the streets and after a couple blocks hit the forest entrance, and dive in, and I dive in deep into her. I spend the next 15 minutes just heading to some known places I know would give me some good snapshots, so I take a quickie snap here. And another quickie snap here, thinking to myself. This is gold, son. All the while forgetting, the whole entire wood is empty. Silent, desolate as I had ever seen it before. I usually run into 1 or 2 people by now, either jogging or walking their mutts, but nothing. It's a good day. I say to myself, let's carry on. So I head to this area called the safe zone. It's simply called that on account that it's wide, expansive with a little sand dune and a tall tree smack down in the middle of it, so if you're under that tree, you can pretty much see all paths that string together Forest 1. I'm there, so I decide, let's bam it to the lake. I pick a path from the safe zone and head for it. It is at this time I sense an eerie feeling in the air, like I'm being watched. I ignored it, because at that age I wasn't mature enough to that point where everyone learns to trust your gut, feelings, internal ringing alarm bell, whatever. Stayed calm and carried. I hit the lake. I'm tired from walking like 45 minutes of miles. Sun was out but casting gray skies with a sudden in and out drizzle between instances. I perk myself against the ledge underneath the cover of some trees and with a low battery on my camera just decide to hang out while staring blandly out at this lake that, be my recollection, wasn't swamped by a heavy fog or mist not 5 minutes ago. First time I seen the place like this, I tell myself. Then my eyes caught it from the distance. I'm frozen. Pic related. More pics. Gotta set the setting. I see a person draped in this loose sheet, what looked to be a black tarp, just simply spinning. Spinning, and spinning around in circles in a pond bush of dogtails. His or her arms open widely as if praising something repeatedly. I'm simply there being as quiet as I can be, not moving an inch, barely releasing a breath observing this med person. This goes on for about 25 seconds until the spin comes to an abrupt stop. I stare wide-eyed with thoughts racing in my head. What's going on? What the fuck is this? Should I? I'm thinking to myself, you got a camera. Don't be one of those idiots who don't capture the shit they so desperately brag about years from now on. Low battery, bars practically invisible. Cheap-ass Walmart brand. Don't die on me. I reach for it and look up. And find him looking in my direction. I tell you, I saw no face. It was white, gray, whatever, like a doll. Was it a mask? I don't know, but I was terrified that I was discovered, pinpointed out from my cover. It was far from me but it still managed to see me in like 4 seconds. So I stare slackjaw. Slowly lifting up my camera. In that moment he or it lifts one white arm out of its tarp and points at him. Just pointing at me from a distance, as if doing some ritual jest, then his arm drops slowly down. You know that scene from Shaun of the Dead where Shaun pushes the zombie chick onto the steel pole and she gets up, while Ed rotates the film reel on his camera. That's what I did. I lifted my camera up. Snap. Another one. Snap. Battery officially dead. Then I got up, slowly backed away and ran all the way back to the safe zone, and out a dozen trails and paths, crisscrossing to my exit. That was a crazy ass day, I must say. 2 revealment pics coming up. Picture 1. And second. 5 spooky 6 me. What the goddamn fuck? This is the most paranormal shit I've seen on /x/ in a while. Dude, those pics are fucking weird. Just. Wow. LMAO, not to diminish how nuts this story is, but can't help but imagine 2 dumbass metal dudes from your neighborhood filming an avant-garde black metal music video, haha. Actual proof on my /x/. Now I've truly seen everything. My personal friend and classmate Daniel Trask went missing in 2011. You can see his website here, http://therucksack.tripod.com/mibzar/cases/trask/t. rask.html. He was also featured in one of David Paulide's books as one of the cases that fit the cluster. I have been in correspondence with Mr. Paulide's investigators as to give them more in-depth personal information about Daniel. I have known Daniel for over 6 years. He used to steal, party, do drugs. He was not spiritual, he was quite selfish and greedy. He also took my sunglasses and never gave them back to me because he was the cool kid. That is until he had an experience in Elmira and was found in a cornfield in the dark walking aimlessly with no shoes. He was put under psychiatric evaluation and deemed instable, but after that experience everything changed. He wouldn't talk to anyone. He was silent. He would see 2 dark entities in the corner of his room at all times watching him and throwing off his covers that he had to move in with his brother because he was in so much fear. He gave all the belongings he stole, took from everyone and returned them immediately. He began to live like a hermit, not the jock, popular guy he was. He would grow his own vegetables, refused to go anywhere. Refused to carry a cell phone. He became ungroomed. He stopped caring for himself and took shelter in the woods. He gave back my sunglasses finally after 2 years of not seeing them and returned his brother's leather jacket he stole. He gave all his money away and just left on frequent trips to go into the wild. I had to copy this message in 2 parts because it is too long to post as one. Here is the second part. His brother, a good friend of mine, confided in telling me Daniel told him he saw strange blue-type orbs coming out of the lakes he walked around and following him on several occasions. They said they keep watching him and that he had 2 encounters with blue beings who told him he has to change his life around, or else. He said he did not listen the first time and maybe that's why those bad entities he began to see in his room began to plague him. However, the strange thing these blue entities told him was that he was one of the chosen ones and that he has a special purpose, which does not make much sense to me, since if these entities were good, why was Daniel able to see the bad ones in his room, or were these bad entities part of a deception? I'm not sure what to think, but that is beyond what the book says about him, considering I am closer to him. Daniel was found this year. Unfortunately, he is deceased. By the way, the link provided on Dan Trask shows him drawing the Eye of Providence, or the Illuminati Eye, but he called it the Eye of Providence. There is strong correlation between David Paulide's research and Ted Gunderson's research, who was head of the FBI. I strongly recommend everyone watch their YouTube interviews for further analysis. Thank you for your time.